So welcome. For those who don't know me, my name's Gordon Thompson and I'm an elder here. And over the last 3 weeks we've had presentations on we the church and what the church does. And today I get to share with you about giving, which was wonderfully portrayed in that last song. It seems to me the longer I live, the more time I spend fixing things. Or worse, I have to pay large sums of money to someone else to do it for me. Have you noticed that yourself? So it's just a fact of life that if you've had something in your possession for any amount of time, then it's going to need your attention. In fact, physicists, those scientists who study stuff, have a name for this. They call this phenomenon entropy. Have we got that slide there? Next slide. So what happens as time goes by is that I accumulate stuff. And each thing I accumulate requires my time and energy to keep it in good shape. It gets me wondering, do I really own this stuff? Or does this stuff own me? Have you noticed that in your life? Have you got things that demand your attention? Let's hear from some people. Do you have anything that in your life that demands your attention? A car. Brilliant. What about you? Schoolwork. Any possessions? Bicycle? Bicycle? Yeah. A house. Very good, yes. Okay, we'll put those up now. So here's some things I thought of: car, clothing, computers, yard and garden, tent, stove, bicycle, so on. It adds up. Sorry? I did have boat in there, but Gavin thought it was wrong. In contrast to this, I've noticed a new movement in society, which is a movement called minimalism. And the idea there is that you reduce what you have at home and reduce even your home. So the ultimate expression of this is tiny houses. So we'll just throw that up there now. So the idea is that you live simply and only maintain the essentials, thus freeing up your time and money. Great idea. But there's been some research on this, and it turns out that even though lots and lots of people get online and eat up all these YouTube videos about these tiny houses and how to manage to fit all of this wonderful stuff into this tiny space and make it livable, nobody's buying them. But whether your idea is to accumulate more and more stuff and keep it in good shape or reduce it all down, whether you're keeping up with the Joneses or leading a minimalist footprint, our stuff can still define us. So this might leave you thinking, well, surely there has to be a better way. As it happens, Jesus had quite a bit to say about our stuff and the things we do with it and our slavery to those things. So let's take a look at the scriptures now. So turn with me to Luke 16, 1-8. Jesus also said to his followers, once there was a rich man. He had a manager to take care of his business. Later, the rich man learned that his manager was cheating him. So he called the manager in and he said to him, I have heard bad things about you. Give me a report of what you have done with my money. You can't be my manager any longer. Later, the manager thought to himself, what will I do? My master is taking away my job, and I'm not strong enough to dig ditches. I'm too proud to beg. I know. I'll do something so that when I lose my job, people will welcome me into their homes. So the manager called in everyone who owed the master any money. And he said to the first man, how much do you owe my master? And the man answered, I owe him 800 gallons of olive oil. So the manager said to him, here is your bill, sit down quickly, make the bill less, write 400 gallons. Then the manager said to another man, How much do you owe my master? And the man answered, I owe him 1,000 bushels of wheat. So the manager said to him, here is your bill. You can make it less. Write 800 bushels. Later the master praised the dishonest manager for being smart. Yes, worldly people are smarter with their own kind than spiritual people are. And one of the best things about reading the Bible regularly and completely, and I've been trying to do the Bible in 1 year. It's a bit of a challenge. But the good thing about that is that you see common verses in a new context. So this parable presents difficulties for some people to interpret because they think that Jesus appears to be approving dishonest behaviour. Of course, such a conclusion doesn't fit well with the overall message of the Bible. So what's he really saying? If we look at this text in a broader context, it becomes much less difficult to understand. For example, if we turn back to Luke 15, 1-3, we can see that the scribes and Pharisees are part of the target audience to whom this parable was addressed, not just the disciples. Jesus was often invited to eat at rich men's houses, and this is likely such an event. Following Jesus' explanation, we have a comment that confirms that Pharisees are present. We learn that they sneer at Jesus' teaching and make fun of him. Perhaps this explains the worldly aspect of this parable. Jesus talks here in terms that may even get some traction with shrewd businessmen and self-interested leaders. He points out to them what they really must do if they want to look out for themselves in the long term. That the Pharisees made fun of this teaching just shows how hardened their hearts were to Jesus and how committed they were to their earthly things and position. Their attitude was thoroughly cynical. Let's examine the parable and unpack it a little bit more. So here we have a really wealthy boss, and he handed over all of the details of running his business to another person, who we will call a manager. And later on, the rich big boss was told by some of his friends that this manager that he had appointed was wasting his money. The manager was probably stealing a portion of the profit to squander on self-indulgent living. Word got out about his deceitful behaviour, and his boss was told about it. So after the boss essentially fires him, the manager is left to reflect on the terrible predicament he now finds himself in. So he decides that what he desperately needs is some friends. So he formulates a cunning plan to create some. He wants these people to remember him as a generous person. So he calls in people who are in debt to his boss, and he tells them that he has decided to reduce their debt. By giving his master's debtors favourable settlements on their account, he knows that they are more likely to return the favour and help him out when he is in need. Although it once again looks as though the manager has been deceitful, the parable ends with the big boss commending the manager for his most recent actions. Why? Because he has done a clever thing to look out for his own future well-being. So let's now look at Jesus' explanation of the parable. So we have that in Luke 16, 9-13. I tell you, make friends for yourselves using worldly riches. And then, when those things are gone, you will be welcomed into that home that continues forever. Whoever can be trusted with small things can also be trusted with large things. Whoever is dishonest in little things will be dishonest with large things too. If you cannot be trusted with worldly riches, then you will not be trusted with true riches. And if you cannot be trusted with the things that belong to someone else, then you will not be given things of your own. No servant can serve two masters. He will hate one master and love the other, or he will follow one master and refuse to follow the other. You cannot serve both God and money. The Pharisees were listening to all these things, and they made fun of Jesus because they all loved their money. Here Jesus encourages his disciples to use the material things of this world for noble purposes. Then when the time comes, they may be welcomed into their everlasting home just as the manager in this story can expect his newly purchased friends to welcome him. He will have a place in their worldly homes as he concludes his time of service. So let's think, on that great day when you are ushered into heaven, you will of course be fully qualified to enter by the righteousness of Christ alone. But won't it be great to be greeted by those friends who have gone before you and who rejoice over you and give thanks for all you have done for them? Do you deserve heavenly riches? How do you relate to money? Is it merely a means to an end? Or is it an end in itself? Do you guard it closely or spend it liberally? Are you using what God has given you in ways that please and honour the Lord? Sometimes we start out well, but over time it's possible to get slack and give in a sloppy or thoughtless manner. On the other hand, it is possible to give much, but to do so out of pride. What God has entrusted us with should be used with excellence. We should do so with pure motive so that God is the one who is glorified. That is the way to be a good manager of what God has entrusted us. Now let's look at some other texts in Luke just to see what they say. Back in Luke 3, 9-11, Jesus said, "The axe is already at the root of the trees. Every tree that does not produce good fruit will be cut down and thrown into the fire." So the people asked him, saying, "What shall we do then?" And he answered and said to them, "He who has 2 tunics, let him give to him who has none, and he who has food, let him do likewise." So this text corroborates the investment Jesus encouraged in today's passage and the possible outcome if the compassionate choice is ignored. Again in Luke 6:38, Jesus says, "Give, and it will be given to you, good measure, pressed down, shaken together, and running out all over, will be put into your bosom. For with the same measure that you use, it will be measured back to you." Now this text is also a good fit, but once we compare this famous verse with today's passage, we can suddenly see that Christ is much more concerned about our good management and our generosity than he is about our earthly wealth. For my own part, I can say that I have been on the receiving end of giving for mission work over many years. I've been blessed in many ways by those who have given. Some have given small amounts out of the abundance that they have, while others have challenged me to more faith and won my admiration by giving joyfully and sacrificially from the little that they have. So let's look at a healthy perspective on giving. As I mentioned earlier, the Pharisees were the ultimate cynics. Now, cynics are jaded and heartless. They believe that people are motivated purely by self-interest. Unfortunately, cynicism can affect us as Christians too. One of the immediate impacts being to steer us away from generous giving. According to Pastor Kerry Newhoff, cynicism is not always a conscious decision, but it's a decision nonetheless. It's a decision you make to stop hoping, stop trusting, stop believing. But think about what's at stake. Cynics will never change the world. They will just tell you why the world can't be changed. Ask them, they know. They know all about it. If you've grown cynical, please understand that cynicism happens not because your heart is closed, but because it was once open. It happens because the idealist in you was idealistic. Cynicism is not inevitable, and you don't have to stay a cynic. There is a path back. It's a path for the brave and for those who long to hope again. It begins with curiosity. That is an eager desire to find out more about the possibilities and potentials of a thing. Have you noticed that you cannot be a cynic or be in a cynic mode and be curious at the same time? Many years ago, as a young adult, I was working with an evangelist who was travelling through Holland. I remember being asked at a meeting to counsel a university student. As I communicated with him through his English-speaking friends, it emerged that he was cynical and depressed. I'd never met this young man before, and I had no training in psychology, so I really didn't know what to say to him. But I suddenly felt impressed to say, follow this prescription. Each day, go secretly and do some good thing to help or invest in another person and not tell anybody about it. Don't tell what you've done. He said he'd give it a try. But recent science gives some credence to the merit of this proposition. Researchers at the National Institute of Neurological Disorders and Stroke in Maryland, USA, wanted to find the neural basis for unselfish, generous acts. They found that the part of the brain that was active when a person donates happens to be the brain's reward centre. Donating also engaged the part of the brain that plays a role in the bonding behaviour between a mother and a child. This involves something called oxytocin, a hormone that increases trust and cooperation. This medical research only underlines what Jesus has taught. It is more blessed to give than to receive. It has also been observed that generosity tracks alongside that other great virtue, courage. Sometimes it's a good thing to be stretched a little. When we act outside of our comfort zone, generosity can be even greater. It may also be the more real for not being posted on Instagram. Let's just have a look at some wrong reasons to give. Giving can have a dark side. That is when our motivations become skewed and not centred on advancing Christ's kingdom. Giving out of fear or guilt. I think some people feel like God is waiting for them to make a big mistake and he's just going to jump on them and condemn them. When we look at the heart reasons for our giving and all we see is fear and guilt, it's time to start praying that God will allow us the opportunity to grow in grace and giving. Giving to get God's attention. Perhaps you're the kind of person who works at making God smile by doing everything he told us to do, including giving. However, God smiles at us for who we are. He doesn't need us to make efforts like giving just to get his attention. That doesn't mean God isn't disappointed when we sin, but it does mean giving to get God's positive attention isn't really necessary. Giving so others will like us. Well, who doesn't want to be accepted or even praised by their peers? If I give and people see it, then they'll talk about me with some kind of admiration. Jesus encourages us to be sure that our giving is not done to attract attention of others. In fact, our giving is best done in secret. Giving for personal gain. Now, we all know some televangelists will tell us that we should give so that we'll get rich. While it is true that we will reap an eternal reward for what we give, I think there is a better motive for doing so, for being generous. If we give only to gain either here or in eternity, then self remains on the focus of attention. But elsewhere, Jesus tells us a better way. A willingness to die to self. He demonstrated this himself. He famously said that there is no greater love than this, than that a man lays down his life for a friend. When we think about all that Christ has done for us, how he for our sakes became poor, it should stir up something within us. There is a desire to live in response to the generosity we've experienced. So, let's be stewards of what God has given. Just like the shrewd manager Jesus speaks of in our main text today, we are stewards of all that God has given into our possession. Now, about that wondering I mentioned at the beginning, Do I really own this stuff, or does this stuff own me? Well, Jesus says that our possessions don't need to own us or define us. After all, who amongst us really wants to buy things we don't need with money we don't have to impress people we don't like? Becoming aware we are the manager of what we have for Christ's kingdom creates a much healthier perspective. We are called to hold what we have loosely and consider others and their needs. This may seem hard, but here's the wonderful truth about Jesus' hard sayings. When we listen and accept his teaching, we find the freedom that we've longed for and the joy that we never knew was possible. If you sense that God wants to encourage you to have a more generous nature, then the good news is that you can. These truths we are exploring today apply to anyone looking to experience personal growth in this area. As I've said before, an attitude of gratitude can move us into a place where we're more creative, more generous, optimistic, and kind. It's a great idea to regularly review what you are grateful for. When you fully appreciate what you receive, what you have, it encourages you to help others. Focus more on understanding other people's perspectives and their feelings can help you feel naturally drawn to help them. Make an effort to learn about where your giving can make the most impact. Invest in the fight against injustice and stand up for marginalised communities. Fight against cynicism and instead get curious about what God is doing in our church. Look excitedly towards the potential and possibility that exists here in Alice Springs and give in faith towards it. Whatever the right step is for you, be responsive to God's prompting. After all, we, the church, are people who give. So let's pray. God, I thank you that you first loved us. You want the best for us. You want us to grow in love for you and for each other. Help us to love each other, be mindful of each other, help each other. Help us to grow to understand the perspective that you have, that our investment in your kingdom is far more important than having wealth in this world. Amen.